Welcome to Podcast for Fun. This is the show where we dive into the passion, the process, and the journeys of creative storytellers as they bring their stories to life. I'm your host, Sophia, and today we are joined by a talented writer, Trevor Mueller. Thank you so much for being here, Trevor.
Thanks for having me, Sophia. I really appreciate it.
So let's start with you telling us a little bit about yourself and maybe your works.
Sure. Well, I don't know about other guests you've had on the show, but I've been doing professional comic book writing for quite some time, almost 20 years. I started off doing stuff on the web and then proceeded to start self-publishing some of those pieces,
Hmm.
and then have since migrated into published work. I've got two Webtoon original series and whatnot. So I span a lot of different genres, a lot of different ages that I write for. A lot of my early professional writing work was for young readers. I did a series called Albert the Alien about the first foreign exchange student from outer space, which is a lovely nod to Saturday morning cartoons from when I was growing up as a kid. And that got nominated for two Harvey Awards. And then from that, I launched two Webtoon original series. I've self-published a number of different stories. Last year, we did two graphic novels which were my first mature readers series. So Los Ojos, which is kind of like John Wick meets John Constantine. It's a bit of like a horror action story about a hitman who sees demons when he looks his targets in the eyes. And then Demon City, which also just launched, which is a buddy cop story with a supernatural twist. It's about two police detectives in Chicago, and one of them happens to be a demon. And the biblical apocalypse has happened, and somebody has just murdered death, and now no one else can die. So they're trying to solve the last homicide that
Hmm.
will ever happen. So I like high concept genre fiction. I like to write for different audiences, and my goal is to eventually have something for everyone on my table when I go to conventions and stuff. So that's a little bit about me, but let me know if there's anything more specific that you're looking for.
I'm kind of curious, since you write in so many genres, right? Do you ever like find yourself like being, I don't know, swayed towards like a specific genre at times? Like I'm swayed towards like sci-fi more, like sci-fi drama.
I
So,
mean, if given the choice, I do enjoy science fiction or fantasy or a combination of those two. I like to mash genres up quite a bit. So my stories usually have like some kind of mystery or thriller component to them, adventure. Like I like high adventure
mm,
types of stories, and so those elements will exist within a lot of the stories that I do write. But um, lately I find myself trying to challenge myself and trying to flex new storytelling muscles, which is why I went all the way over to like the mature readers end of the spectrum and tried to do like full on horror stories because I'd never done that before, and that seemed like it would be a fun thing to try. I've never written a romance story before, for example, and so I've recently started to put together pitches for like, well, what would my take on the romance genre be? Like, what would that look like? How would that story kind of be? What would those characters be like? Um, and while some of those pitches have gone out and already received their rejection letters, which is very common within the creative field,
yeah.
again, it's been a learning experience and something that again I get to try something new, which to me is fun and thrilling and keeps my interest level high.
I agree with you. I need to write romance too. I suck at writing romance. I think it's like my biggest weakness. The funny thing is though, like my sister loves watching romance, and she always like drags me into me watching it with her. But I can't help but cringe when I watch romance. I don't know why. It like
I like it. I like a good rom com myself, but that's not where my brain goes to when I think about story.
yeah.
And so to try to come up with what would my take on that be, like what are my elements of humor that I enjoy and appreciate? What are the things that I find interesting about characters? And then trying to blend those two things together and find something that attracts two or more characters together hadn't been something that I'd really thought about. Like romance and relationships have been a part of stories that I have written,
Mhm.
but the focus was not on the romance. And I think that that's a very different structure than other kind of genre fiction that I'm more accustomed to writing. So again, for me, like I enjoy reading those types of stories on occasion just to kind of see what do I like about it, what do I not like about it, what would I do differently if I were writing this story. There's a handful of people that write romance that I really enjoy their take on it. My friend Leanne, who does Let's Play, um, she's I think has a very similar style to what I would kind of like, but she's
Mhm.
coming up with ideas that are well beyond where my brain goes when it comes to romance. So I really appreciate that kind of fresh perspective that she's bringing in there, and I'm just trying to figure out like what would my fresh perspective be within a genre like that. Long answer to a short question. Like you, I tend to gravitate towards science fiction because I'm a consumer of science fiction. I like science fiction. I've got a background in science and marketing technology.
Mhm.
And I mean, one of my webtoon series was cyberpunk, right? It was a Nexus Point series, which was about hackers, and fighting bounty hunters in the future.
Mhm. Yeah, I read a bit of it. It was cool. And they had like music in the first episode, and I was like, oh my God, I want to put music in my episodes, but I'm in Canvas, so it's completely different.
Well, I think you can still put music in. I've never done Canvas, so I don't know. But the music on that's actually done by my buddy Johnny Young Bosch, who's a former Power Ranger actor. He does anime voice acting. And so he did the music for the episodes. He wrote two songs for us, and one of them he used in the trailer that he helped me make,
Mhm.
which we put up on YouTube, and then he did the voice work for one of the characters in that trailer.
Yeah, I saw it too.
Yeah.
I was like looking at it because I was like, when you get into scrolling, you just can't stop reading. That's what happened with me.
And I feel like Nexus Point is a series that binges very well.
Hmm.
I don't think the week to week updates have done us any favors because it was kind of structured like a political thriller where there's a lot of questions at the beginning and then we
Hmm.
start to give a lot of answers towards the ends. And so people who had been reading it for week to week on like an annual basis, it wouldn't surprise me if there was some frustration there because it's we lay a clue in like episode 3 for something that doesn't capitalize until episode 13 or 20, and so it's months or half a year later that you finally start to get some of the answers to some of the questions that we lay quite early. But I like that structure, and I think it reads really well when it's collected,
Hmm.
or when all the episodes are up and people are able to sit down and watch it. Versus my other series on Webtoon Originals, Repossessed, which was
Hmm.
structured to kind of be read week to week. We had smaller arcs within those that only lasted about 5 or 6 episodes, and I feel like that's an easier thing to kind of ingest on a week to week basis. And it looks like a lot of Webtoon original series are starting to lean towards that type of structure when it comes to storytelling.
I think it's better too. Sounds to me like Repossessed is more like could be a TV show, and then Nexus Point should be like a film because you're supposed to watch it all in one sitting, right? And then the other one you can like watch like every week, and you won't be lost. Be like, huh? Wait, what? Who is that? Why am I
Yeah.
supposed to know this guy?
Well, they have a conflict that they have to overcome, and then that conflict ends in 5 or 6 episodes, and then they move on to the next conflict. You're right; it was written to be very episodic,
Mhm.
um, like a television show structure, and each episode is kind of like an act of that TV show structure, right? So there's typically like a 3 act structure within traditional storytelling. Television tends to have 5 acts, and
Mhm.
so we kind of follow that a little bit more with the repossessed structuring, versus Nexus Point, which was designed to be ongoing and continuous, but it was designed to kind of like the X Files or Lost, right? Like have compounding questions where when you get an answer, it leads to another question.
Mhm.
And it was pitched as a 4 season story. Webtoon was kind enough to give us a full second season, but my team was just so burned out after doing season 1 that they were like, "Can we not do 50 more episodes? Can we just do like 15 more episodes?" So that's what we're working on right now, is what we're calling the final 15
Mhm.
episodes of that series.
What is like the pitching process like for Webtoon?
Well, it's changed quite a bit. I would say there's two ways to get in.
Hmm.
One is the way that you're talking about, which is have a series on Canvas, build up an audience and a following,
Hmm.
because the editors are constantly looking at what's going on Canvas and what people are reading and engaging with and what they really like.
Hmm.
And if that attracts their attention, then they reach out to you and you can kind of pitch them what your story looks like. Because I've had, almost 20 years of experience in the industry, mostly on the print side, but also with web comics, not vertical scroll kind of webtoon style comics, but traditional kind of web comics format.
Hmm.
I was able to just pitch the editors directly upon getting an introduction to them, and they asked like, send us story ideas, like we want story ideas, and so I'll just send them pitch ideas and story ideas off the cuff to be like, is this something you would be interested in? Should I develop this further? If you have zero interest in what this is, then let me know. And early on in my conversations with Webtoon, I mean, I was asking a lot of questions around like, what are their goals from a storytelling perspective? What are genres that are kind of underdeveloped that they would like to see a little bit more blown up or a little bit more representation
Hmm.
within those genres? And science fiction was an underdeveloped, kind of underread genre on the platform. And so they really wanted a sci-fi story, which is why we pitched them Nexus Point.
Hmm.
And I probably sent them probably 12 different pitches, I think, when I originally reached out. And my editor switched hands early on in development within while we were working on Nexus Point.
Hmm.
And the new editor came on. He was like, "Oh, and we would also like to greenlight this series, Repossessed, as well." And so I was like, "Oh, so not only am I doing vertical scroll comics for the first time, but I'm doing two of them at the same time." And so that was a fun learning experience. But we were probably 2 months into development on Nexus Point at that time, so there was a lot of learnings
Hmm.
that I had with my team there that I was then able to apply to Repossessed. And Nexus Point was kind of designed to be different because they had asked for very specific things that they wanted within that story. Again, they wanted a science fiction story, not sci-fi romance, not sci-fi fantasy, not sci-fi
Yeah.
slash something else. They wanted a pure science fiction story. They wanted a story that was attractive to male readers as well as female readers because they really wanted to grow their male readership on the platform.
Hmm.
They wanted something that had diverse representation within the characters, so not just a cast that looked very homogenous.
Yeah.
And then they wanted the last box on there was, we want a story unlike anything else that we've seen on our platform. And so that involved a little bit of research to figure out like, what's popular on platform, what do all these stories kind of have in common, what are similar kind of tropes and themes that are going on within those, and how can we maybe upend those for the readers and keep them on their toes without them expecting what we're going to end up doing. So, like, we have a romantic interest that gets introduced in episode one for one of our lead characters, and in episode three, that romantic interest is hospitalized and is out of the story for the rest of the adventure because the relationship that we establish within Nexus Point, and this is one of the things I think Webtoon was really attracted to with it, is not a romantic relationship. It's a mentor mentee, kind of a father daughter relationship between the two lead characters.
Hmm.
And so I mean, it's about a father who's lost a daughter, and it's about a daughter who, has been separated from her parents, and the two of them needing to combine their skills and abilities in order to survive in this world that has thrown them every single kind of obstacle that they could possibly get thrown at them together. And the the bounty hunter Jack Travis is kind of an analog man living in a digital world, and then Jemmy Reynolds the hacker is very savvy when it comes to technology but not so savvy when it comes to human interaction or face-to-face interaction,
Hmm.
or physical conflict. And so as she's starting to get hunted by, rogue hackers or crooked bounty hunters or corrupt cops, there's a mysterious paramilitary organization that's chasing her down. And so like she can deal with some of that stuff, but like she really needs help from Jack, and Jack also needs her help because she's downloaded a file that's like related to his own mysterious past. And, you know, in order to navigate the nuances of the technology involved with that, she's got a skill set that he just completely lacks. And so I kind of pitched it a bit like a Buffy Giles relationship where, one of them is older and more experienced than the other one, but the other one still has experiences the other one doesn't. And so even though it may be positioned like a mentor mentee, they really are kind of peers
Mm.
in many regards and equals, and they rely on each other in that way. And so we've done a very conscious effort to balance out how that relationship works in the story to make sure that each of them are getting equal footing within the agency that we've established within the story.
How developed was the story when you like first pitched it?
Yeah, so my process with them, you go through the pitch process, which involves the summary of the story, right? So in like a paragraph or a page,
Mhm.
like what is the story?
Yeah.
What are we going to get? And then I would also do like seasonal breakouts for them. So I had like 4 seasons kind of outlined to say, within a page or 3 to 6 paragraphs, like here's what would happen in season one and the arcs that we could expect and some of the plot twists that would be in there and some of the mysteries that would be introduced or that would be wrapped up.
Mm.
And then it all comes to a conclusion by the end of what we had pitched was the 4th season. And we sped that up once we found out we were only going to get 2 seasons. And then once I found out from my team that we wanted to kind of shrink season two down to 15 episodes, I had to compact that
Why?
outline even further. And so some of the supporting character arcs that we were going to go through and stuff, unfortunately, just had to fall by the wayside.
Hmm.
Kill your darlings, I think is the term, right? Where you're trying to get rid of some of the nuanced things that are nice to have, but at the end of the day, like we got to wrap up this story. So that kind of goes into the pitch process. I did a little bit of world building within the pitch process too, just because this was science fiction. And so the
Yeah.
editors needed to understand how does the world work? How does the technology work? Who are the various factions that are at play within this story? So there was a little bit of Bible work that had to be done
Hmm.
when it came to story, character, and world building. And then after that, it just came down to a seasonal outline, right? So like 50 episodes, what happens and in each episode, right? And so I just did a breakdown. I usually work with outlines anyway because I'm kind of a plot first writer,
Yeah.
and so outlines are kind of a first draft for me. They help me look at the bigger picture, understand the major plot points that are going to be happening and the story beats that are in there, and incorporate them within there because it's very easy to move things around if you need to, or rejuggle or repace things once you're able to kind of see that 800 or 1,000 foot view
Yeah.
of the seasonal story. So we went back and forth a little bit on some of the seasonal notes and
Mm.
outline, and then after that, I jump into scripting. And so the scripting is the part that people are probably most familiar with, which is where you're actually doing the panel breakouts, the dialogue, all of those components.
Mhm.
And honestly, I found webtoon writing to be a lot faster for me than traditional print comic pages because I don't have to worry about layout as much. It's just a cascading series of vertical panels.
Yeah.
And you can only play with size and format so much within that script format. There was a lot more that I could play with in the gutter space, which was new for me, right? The space between panels.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting and unique because you don't typically do that within a traditional print page. Like your page real estate is very sacred, and depending on how you use that page real estate kind of determines like the impact, the importance, the amount of time that passes
Mm.
within any given image that you are including within there. Whereas the vertical scroll, the pacing is a little bit more even because the panels are usually taking up about a phone screen, sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more. The larger images would be more impactful or longer kind of moments. The smaller ones would be more snippets and quick cuts, kind of equivalent.
Mm.
But because I didn't have to worry about what you typically have to worry about within like a traditional print page, right? Which is how many panels per page, where are those panels going to go, how is that going to help readers' eyes flow from panel to panel. Like you don't have to worry about those things within the vertical scroll. And so for me, it was just a much faster process when it
Mm.
came to writing because I could literally just knock out all of the panels versus being like, on page one, I will have three panels and they will all be vertical, and this is how it will kind of go. Which sometimes you do that as a writer, and sometimes you kind of leave that up to your artist. It all kind of depends.
Mm.
But I like to provide a little bit of direction in my scripts if the artist is open to it, because I'll have an idea in my head of what pacing should kind of look like or how impactful a given moment should be. But I usually include a note at the beginning of my scripts that says, this is just my idea, but if you've got better ideas, like by all means, bring it, because comics are a collaborative medium, especially for someone
Yeah.
like me who's just a writer, versus somebody who's doing both writing and art themselves, and they can kind of do all that within their own expertise. I have to work with somebody else to kind of tell that story. And so if my script doesn't convey the emotion, the impact, the tone of what we're trying to convey within that given panel, the artist might come back with something that just doesn't match, doesn't fit well. And that, if I don't catch that or the editor doesn't catch that, like that'll come off as very odd to the readers
Yeah.
because they'll pick up on those things quite quickly.
Mm.
And so your script as a writer is really a vehicle to just communicate to your artist what's happening, why it's happening, what the intention is behind this, if there are additional themes or subtexts that are going on, right? Like I don't try to hide those. I try to make those very apparent and blunt in the script so that the artist is never confused about what we're trying to do or is
Mm.
never playing a guessing game about what we're trying to convey within those moments.
Did you ever have like a hard time trying like conveying something to an artist?
Sometimes, sure. I work with a lot of international artists, and so I have discovered that when English is not always a first language and sometimes is not a second language, that colloquialisms do not translate very well. And I work with a number of artists that don't speak English at all. They literally rely on like Google Translate to translate the scripts. So I'll give you an example. So there was a moment in my Los Ojos graphic novel where I had written the main character's name is Andres. Andres goes through a stack of papers. Like that's what I wrote.
Mm.
And what I meant by that was that Andres is sitting at a desk. He has some files opened in front of him that have paper in them that are some kind of like rap sheet or police file or something, that he's doing an investigation with paper. Um, and that's a single panel. What the artist drew was a vertical stack of papers from floor to ceiling, and Andres is literally walking through it and is knocking over this stack of papers. So Andres goes through a stack of papers is what he
That's so
drew.
funny.
And so I had to be like, my bad. I I did not effectively communicate in the script what I wanted to have happen here. And
Mhm.
so I have had to be more conscious of any kind of colloquialisms or shortcuts that I would use in communication within my scripts, especially when working with English as a second or third language kind of artists,
Mm.
or people who don't speak the language that are just relying on Google Translate, because you never want that confusion about what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And I've started to honestly adapt more screenplay kind of direction when it comes to my more recent scripts, so that there's never confusion about change in locations, time of day, any of those pieces that are in there, because it tends to go like the scene break, interior, exterior, where's the location, what is the time of day, is it day, night, morning, twilight, whatever, and then what is happening, the direction within the scene, right?
Mm.
So if you are, I'll make it up, at a library in the morning, then it's an exterior shot, establishing shot of the library in the morning in downtown Manhattan, I'll make it up. And then, people on the street are getting their morning coffee or whatever. Traffic is light. The sun is coming up over the horizon. We can see the skyscrapers in the background. interior shot of the library. We see our characters with big, thick books in front of them as they are studying for their test or whatever the thing is that they are doing within their panels, and then you can break down into your dialogue or narration as needed.
So just gotta be as literal as possible, so there's no confusion whatsoever, right?
And every artist is different that you work with.
Yeah.
Some require or request more direction than others. I've worked with artists that get very upset if you give them too much direction because honestly, like they love storytelling too. And so to take away any of their options or their tools when it comes to telling the story visually, which is the artist's role and responsibility there. It's the conversion of that script into something visual that people can see. If you take away those tools and that's something that they love to do, like they can, it diminishes the process for them. It makes it less enjoyable for them. And
Mm.
so I always try to adjust and pivot my own style of writing scripts to what the artists like themselves so that that joy never gets diminished. Again, I've had one guy that really prefers that I give him layout direction so that he doesn't have to figure out how many panels per page or any of that stuff. I've worked with artists that are like, don't tell me how many panels per page you want. I'll figure that out.
Okay.
And they get really upset if you try to do otherwise. So it's a spectrum, and you just kind of have to adjust as you're working with your collaborative partners.
So as a writer, do you prefer someone who, includes more of their like artistic vision into the work, or do you want more of like, do you have a very, very like specific idea and you prefer someone who puts that onto the paper?
It varies based on the project or based on the scene. Um, I like when an artist will put skin in the game and will bring their own expertise and passion into a project. And I'll give you an example, right? So, like with Nexus Point, we had like our main cast of characters that needed to be designed.
Hmm.
And I don't like to describe my characters physically unless an artist wants me to give any kind of physical direction. I like to describe them either attitudinally or behaviorally. And if they have like a special ability or like, a cybernetic limb or like a cybernetic eye or something, like I will tell them that because it's important to the story or the plot. But I usually just try to describe who they are, not what they look like, so that
Yeah.
the artist can kind of design them themselves based on what they are thinking. And I've generally gotten really positive results back when I do that with my artists. With Nexus Point, with Sebastian, my artist on that one, I basically said, like, here are the main cast that we have to design. And then also let's just design like, 4 to 6 general bounty hunters and hackers. Like just give me a couple of different designs for them. And he would send those back. And he sent back one, I remember, of this guy with like this ponytail and this giant VR mask over him. And he's this hulking dude, and he's got two samurai swords and a robotic leg and a robotic arm. And I see this character and I'm like, this is a bully among the bounty hunters, and he steals other people's bounties, and his name is Rook. And suddenly, this extra, we need 4 to 6 bounty hunter characters became a character because the design inspired me so much. And he appears in the first episode of Nexus Point, and he's a
That's up.
reoccurring character throughout, even though like he was never part of the pitch, he was never part of the story. I just knew that we needed some background characters to kind of fill roles as the story
Mm.
progressed. I love that collaborative part of the process and that ability for me to hopefully inspire the artist, but for the artist to inspire me back when it
Hmm.
comes to designs, when it comes to ideas, when it comes to whatever they're bringing to the project. And whenever I start a relationship with an artist on a project, I always start with 2 questions. What do you love to draw? And what do you not love to draw? And that helps me to kind of understand what should I be putting more of into the story and what should I be putting less of into the story so that we can both continue to kind of collaborate, work together, and tell the best possible story that we can. And generally, that's worked pretty well for me for the last 20 years.
So do you have an example of how that question affected like a story?
Oh, sure. Well, I'll tell you a funny one. Yishan, my artists on
Mm.
Repossessed. So I had been talking to Yishan for probably a year or two prior to Repossess getting the green light because I really wanted to work with her on something. Like I loved her art style. I her and I really hit it off. Like we had a very similar sense of humor, a very similar kind of communication style. She lives over in China, and she
Mhm.
had been working on a lot of, I'll call them romance books, but they're not romance books. Like she was working on what I call a lot of booby books. Like it's books with a lot of nudity that would have like a romance component to them. And some of
Uh-huh.
them were from publishers and some of them were from independent creators and whatnot. And I couldn't afford Yishan to work on any of my creator owned stuff. Like her page rate was too high. I recognized that, but we still just really loved the collaborative process. And
Yeah.
so when Webtoon greenlit Repossessed, I didn't have an artist attached to it.
Yeah.
And I emailed Yishan and I was like, hey, Webtoon's given us a green light. Would you be interested in being the artist on this? And if so, I can give you the details. And she's like, I have one question for you. Do I have to draw any naked people? And I was like, no, like Webtoon doesn't allow for that. Like we're not going to do that. She's like, I'm in. I don't care what the story is. I don't care what the genre is. I don't care what the characters are. I just don't want to draw naked people anymore. And I was like, okay. And so and funny story to that because we do have like the character there are a lot of fan service moments that do happen within Repossessed,
Yeah.
um just from a comedic kind of standpoint. um and season two, like her and I, again, just very much similar sense of humor.
Yeah.
When we got the green light for season two of Repossessed, Webtoon was very direct when they were like, this is your final season. Like, we're going to give you 50 more episodes, no more. This is what you get. Wrap it all up. This will be the end. And I went to Yishan and I was like, after we had done a lot of stuff in season one where we were like, we had to kind of get approval from their brand safety team in advance
Yeah.
because we were having like fan service moments or moments where like characters were going to be getting smoochies but not quite smoochies in there. And we only got one no from brand safety in their credit to all of season one. We only got one no, which was quite impressive. I give them a lot of credit for that. But so they gave us the green light for season two, but they were like, this is the end. And I was like, great, thanks, we really appreciate it. And then I went to Yisha and I was like, how would you like to make season two an exercise in trying to make the brand safety team as uncomfortable as possible every single episode? And she was like, I'm in. She's And so like the main character joins like a life model drawing class as a model. And like,
Oh my
you know,
God.
like we did. And again, there's no nudity. Like, she her box was checked of like, we're not showing anything in there that she doesn't want to draw, but at the same time we're like, we're gonna make those brand safety people sweat a little bit to see what we can get away with. And they never said no. They never said no to anything that we did. So maybe we weren't pushing the envelope enough. But it was just a fun process of, again, like, our two senses of humor really kind of overlapped and aligned. The
Mhm.
stuff that we were being asked to do sometimes, like, we were just kind of like gritting our teeth a bit. Like, there was no romance component in Repossessed originally in the pitch because, again, that's not what my background is. And
Mhm.
editorial wanted to see more romance. They wanted to see, a will they won't they between the two lead characters, Troy Richards and his friend Mari. And that was never written that way because Mari was very much inspired by a friend of mine
Mhm.
who, like, I lived with for 8 months, and like her and I are just BFFs, but there was never a romantic component to our relationship. So to be asked to add that in, I had to change the way I thought about Troy and Mari within the story because it hadn't been a part of their journey together. They were two best friends trying to navigate the nuances of retail when they work at a store that sells demonically possessed items. Like it's a supernatural retail comedy, slash adventure story. And so they editorial like really wanted more like, will they won't they, like, we want readers to be rooting for them and shipping these two characters and stuff. And then we had introduced another female character as the story progressed who,
Mhm.
like, she became much more important as the story went on, and they were like, now we want a love triangle. And like editorial really wanted a love triangle between these three characters, and I was like, that's not the dynamic that I wanted to go for. Like, I don't like women's relationships and stories to be dependent on like a love interest or anything like that. It just feels very tropey
Mm.
and uninteresting to me. But so when editorial said that, I was like, well, why don't we just turn this into a harem comic? Why don't we just have all the characters fall in love with the lead character and he's being pursued by everybody romantically? And they're like, yes, we love it. And I was like, crap. Now I have to turn this into a harem comic. And so, and to a degree we did. But again, that was never the focus of the story.
Okay.
We just threw in moments of somebody like eyeballing Troy as he's walking down the street because they were like, hello, where they otherwise would not have been interested in him at all. And it just became like an opportunity for visual puns
Mhm.
within the tale. So, it's a collaborative, long answer to a short question. It's a collaborative process across the board when you've got editorial involved, when you've got artists, when you've got yourself. And it's just how do you find the joy in all those things? And when you get notes down that you don't always agree with, like where do you draw your line and where do you stand your ground on things that you're like, no, we will not do this thing? And where do you find flexibility within your story and your structure and your character arcs to allow it to happen? And at the end of the day, adding in a romantic component to Repossessed was not a hard no for me. Like I was like, okay, I'm fine with adding that in. It could be an area where the story is weaker and your platform and your readership better than I do. And at the end of the day, it became a fun thing that Yishan and I were just like, how do we do this in a way that's unexpected that maybe makes our editor, be like, hold on, I need to forward that to some people before we can get the green light on it. And that was just where Yishan and I would just kind of sit there and go tee hee hee in the background because we were just toying with people. And I think our readership picked up on that joy and stuff too that we were having while we were doing it, and it became a running gag with a lot of our readers too while that series was going.
Now I'm curious, what's that one thing that they said no to?
Uh,
Is it that bad?
no. So again, when I write my scripts, I try to provide as much flexibility as possible for my artists. And the first episode of Repossessed, it's all available online. It's all free to read. But in the first episode, we have a foreshadowing moment where Troy, the main character, has a dream that his girlfriend and a girl he had a crush on in high school are kidnapped by some kind of evil villain, and he has to save them, but he's in his birthday suit. He's not wearing any clothes.
Mm.
And it's supposed to establish that he has a fear of public nudity and perhaps a self image problem, which he spends the first season kind of trying to overcome. And in the pawn shop that he works, there is a weapon. It's a battle axe
Mm.
that feeds on your own inner insecurities. And his inner insecurity is that he's not wearing any clothing. And so the pitch that we had put into the thing was we're going to end the season where the final battle of him needing to save the world, the only weapon available to him is the battle axe. And so he has to save the world in the nude. And we will Austin Powers style cover everything up. Like there
Yeah,
won't be any nudity, because he'll be like slashing at a dude's head and there'll be like a head in the way and it'll cover him up. But he's
yeah.
he's clearly running around with no pants on. And so there was a scene or a panel that I wrote
Hmm.
in one of the later episodes where I said that it was a hero shot of Troy standing with the battle axe, ready for battle, looking like he's ready to throw down and save the world. And he's back to back with this female counterpart that he has, Cheryl, who also works in the store.
Mm.
And she's fully clothed, like she's got normal weapons in her hands. But it was supposed to be a hero shot of the two of them ready for battle, showing kind of that they have synced up, that he's overcome his
Mm.
inner insecurities, and that the axe no longer holds sway over his psyche. And when Yishan drew it, she drew it a little bit lower than I think brand safety was comfortable with her showing, because there was a butt shot in there. Like she showed Troy's derriere, if you will.
Interesting.
And that was the no that we got. They were like, we really like we get that he's not wearing pants. We don't need to see that he's not wearing pants and what the pants would cover. And I was like, that's a fair note.
Mm.
Can we use the Webtoon logo as like a censor bar over his butt? And that was the no that we got. So we,
Ah,
so we just pixeled it. We just pixeled it. But
that's so funny.
again, it was Yishan and I just playing.
So you said that you have like the similar person, not person, similar humor as Ishan, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Can
We
you
get along.
describe a sense of humor?
It's playful. We like to subvert expectations, and we like to keep the readership and editorial guessing. And that's hard to do when it comes to editorial because editorial should never be guessing. Like they should always know like what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so I'd say from a story beat perspective, they always knew what was going to happen in terms of how it was going to look. Yishan would try to subvert expectations. And that's fun for me too, because when I see the stuff come back in, like
Mm,
I'm like, oh, this is so much better than what I had envisioned in my head, right? Like, which is why when I try to write, I try to be as flexible as possible. Now, there are moments where I might have an idea in my head of how a thing needs to look, and I will be more descriptive and more detailed within my description within that particular panel.
mm,
Um, but I didn't really have to do that much with Repossessed because it took place in like a modern day kind of society. And the only time that I really needed to describe something was like some of the possessed objects that might appear within the store, or if there were like a particular location that they needed to go to, and I knew that it needed like a catwalk or it needed something where the story would take place at some point in there, and we needed to kind of establish that within the tale. Versus like Nexus Point, where because it's a near future, we're designing a world together. Characters have unique abilities with hacking and how hacking manifests itself visually within the story. Like that sometimes required a lot more description than what I had to put into to Repossessed. And again, it just comes down to being versatile as a writer and making sure that you're clear in your communications to your artists about what you're trying to do. And then if they've got a better idea, obviously let's hear it.
mm,
And there are moments where Sebastian and I was very succinct about how I wanted a panel to look, and he stuck to those guidelines because he liked the way that it looked. There are other times where I wrote something in a panel, and he's like, I don't like that. I don't think that that's like dramatic enough, because he understands the tone, he understands what we're going for, and I'll give you an example of that one too, right? So the one where he's stuck to the script is very closely episode one. There's a hacker that's being chased by Rook, the bounty hunter bully that I mentioned earlier. And the hacker, Pac, has been stopped by one of our main protagonists, Jack Travis. Um, and Rook is basically coming to steal the bounty from Jack. And so Pac basically like pulls out this invisible keyboard and starts
ew.
hacking, and we have these lines of code coming from the top of the panel. It's like a top down shot in an alleyway, and
Mm,
lines of code are coming out of Pac, going down the walls and the floor of the alleyway and going to the bounty hunter Rook at the bottom of the panel. So it's a long vertical scrolling kind of panel where you're following these lines of code as they go down. And then we cut to the shot of Rook, like, and his arm's been infected with this code. And so Pac's like taking over his cybernetic limbs. He's forcing him to punch himself and do all this silly stuff, right? And so Sebastian stuck very, very closely to that. There's a scene later on in like episode 4 or 5 where we have this mysterious woman with purple hair show up, whose name is Dominique. And I described like who Dominique was. Like Sebastian knew what her abilities were. We knew that we needed her to be very intimidating. Like if you were to compare her to something, she's the Terminator, right, coming after Jemmy, like the boogeyman. Like she is frightening, and everything that she does needs to be frightening. And I had a scene where she kicks in the door to Jemmy's apartment. And I had originally kind of envisioned just like kicking the door in and knocking it off the hinges, and it kind of dangling there on the frame of the door. And what Sebastian drew was her like leg as a blur, and then the door in this very long panel just flying across the room and hitting the wall on the opposite side of the room. And I was like, yeah, that's much better than what I wrote. Like that's way more intimidating and builds up the mystery of who this character is and why she can do those types of things and establishes very visually and very quickly like this is a character not to mess with. And
Hmm.
if she's coming after Jemmy, Jemmy's in trouble. So again, collaboration is a beautiful thing.
Do you prefer like writing on a vertical comic or more of a comic book page type of comic?
I do both. And I think it depends on the story you're trying to tell and what platform or media is going to be best for telling that story. There are stories that would work best within a vertical scroll. I wrote Nexus Point and Repossessed for vertical scroll.
Hmm.
We are thinking about the translation of those into print, but changes are going to have to be made in order to make that happen because we've just got panels that are way too long to fit into a printed page size, especially if we go with something that's kind of like a digest size, like a manga style
Yeah.
book. They're way too long. And so if you were just to take them as a one-to-one ratio, a panel that went on for like 2 to 3 screens on your phone would only be like an inch thick on the printed page. It would be impossible to see it. And so how do you convert that art? Does that need changes? Does that need augmentation? Can we crop the top and the bottom of it to zoom in more on the characters? Do we have to put a new gutter space in there so it's no longer just a continuous image, but now it's something else? So these are conversations that we need to have to try to convert those pieces versus like if you're doing it the opposite way where you've got a traditional print comic book and you're trying to convert it over into vertical scroll, full page spreads no longer have the impact that they would on a screen that they do within a printed page.
Yeah.
Horizontal panels do not translate within a vertical screen. Either
Yeah.
they're way too small or you have to flip them to make them vertical and then suddenly everyone's like
Oh
tilting
my
their
God.
head to try to
I don't
read it.
like that. Yeah.
It's not conducive to the reading experience. So I'm not saying that stories can't be translated between the two. As a writer, I like to try to write for the platform that I'm trying to write for. And then if
Yeah.
we need to convert it later on, we can think through that, but changes will likely have to be made. You can't just crop an image. It just doesn't make for a good reading experience that, at least not that I've seen.
Hmm. So before you did Webtoon, you never did any vertical scroll kind of comics, right?
No, just traditional print pages. Even when I was doing web comics, like they were traditional print pages that were just put up onto the web.
Hmm.
Um, and so it was just a new experience for me and something that I really wanted to try to do. And especially with the incorporation of multimedia in there, because you can have music, you can have animation, and
Hmm.
none of my stories include animation so far, but the opportunity to do that was kind of fun and exciting.
I kind of I didn't grow up with it, but like throughout my entire teenage years, I read webtoons because it was the most common thing to do, and everybody was
Sure.
like, "Did you read like was it Re something Empress? Did you read there's another one about the guy who switches from a fat body to like a super fit body. I forgot the name of it though.
Uh, Lost in Transition, something like
No,
that.
there's that one, but there's another one. It's like a Korean guy. He's like fat, and then he moves to a new school. And when he
They made
sleeps,
a they made a TV show of this one.
yeah.
I know what you're talking about, but I can't think of the title off
I
the top of my
can't
head.
believe I forgot the name. What was it called?
Yeah,
Oh my God, I remember the main character's name. I think it was like Daniel Kim or something. I think his real name in Korean is completely different, but that was the translation in my book. And I read like 100 episodes, and I didn't like how after 100 episodes they forgot the main character even existed, and they just started focusing on side characters who I didn't care about. And like my favorite character, I think his name was like Vasco or something. He never showed up again, and that's like my pet peeve when it comes to popular series is just keep going and going and they never have an end to it. You know?
Hmm? Was I think so. Syndication, right, is what we're kind of talking about here when it comes to the I don't want to use the word filler, but the fillering of story, right? Where you suddenly need to figure out how do I take a story that was only ever supposed to be like 10 books and turn it into 56 books. And that becomes let's focus on our supporting cast
Mhm.
and give them backstory and interesting quests to go on, and they kind of become their own leads. And you start to filter into this ABC structure of storytelling where and this is a very common structure of storytelling. But your A story is kind of like your overall episodic adventure that's going on, and it's your one and done, and you'll have multiple A stories throughout a given adventure. Your B story tends to be like your character arc
Mhm.
components, right? So like what are your characters trying to go through and what are they trying to do? And then your C story is like ultimately what is your adventure about? Like what are you trying to do? What is the main end goal? If we look at something like Dragon Ball or One Piece, right? Like your C story is like we've gotten all the Dragon Balls or we
Yeah.
have accomplished and gotten the One Piece. And that's never happened in One Piece, right? In Dragon Balls, they've gotten all the Dragon Balls
Yeah,
at certain
yeah.
points, but like they've never completed the C story, so the story can keep going, and then they keep recycling A and B stories, or not recycling, but replacing them and repeating them, or giving them new arcs and new things. So the story starts to go like where you'll move from your A story to your B story, and you'll have an adventure that focuses on like a character, and then you'll go back to like an episodic thing, and then you'll go back to this thing, and then you'll go back to your C story where we're looking for the One Piece again and something happens but we don't necessarily find it, so that one goes back down. And you, like television, you just kind of keep juggling between this A, B, and C structure to
Yeah.
focus on different things for each of the arcs and adventures or collections that you're putting together within there. And presumably if you continue to introduce new characters, you can maintain that structure forever. That's what The Simpsons has done in
Yeah.
American television, right? Where it's you're not always necessarily focused on Homer and Bart and Marge and Lisa and Maggie, but you'll have an episode that's about Mr. Burns, or that's about Smithers, or that's about Ned Flanders, or that's about Moe, or right. And so you can that's where the stories start to juggle around, and you can start to create a sense of continuation with still giving a little taste of what readers love and then hopefully coming back to what they actually signed up for in
Mhm.
the long run. One Punch Man is doing this right now as well because I read the manga series for One Punch Man, and
Mhm.
like the lead character is in the first 2 to 3 books, and then after that it focuses on a roster of characters that have nothing to do with him, and he appears once every 3 books. It's not about him, it's about everyone else and the struggles that they have within combat, and then he'll come in every now and then and like defeat a dude with a comical one punch. And but at the beginning every story was about him like defeating things with one punch,
Yeah.
but that's not sustainable. Like you can't keep having another villain come in that's more and more and more and more powerful, because that would get boring and that would get repetitive, and you can't keep that going forever. You have to do something a little bit different. I mean, that's the challenge with Superman, right? Where Superman as a character has to focus on more like ethical and moral type of stories,
Yeah.
because that's something that challenges Superman physically. Like, if you just kept introducing more and more characters that Superman has to punch, you know, Superman eventually gets stronger and overcomes, or the story ends because the bad guys win.
Yeah.
Your options become very limited from a storytelling perspective.
So do you prefer like TV shows or like completed stories like films?
Well, even if it's a TV show, there should be some kind of arc and some kind of story that gets completed
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
within the tale. And then it's how many episodes do you have to fill in order to do that? Um, one of my criticisms that I had for like the Netflix era of Marvel TV shows that they did with like Daredevil and Jessica Jones and Luke Cage and those, Jessica Jones is a fantastic character, but they had 3 to 5 episodes worth of story and they had 13 episodes to fill. And so it became a lot of filler. And I think people
Hmm.
got very frustrated with some of the stories they did. Iron Fist was rife with that as well, where they just didn't have enough story to keep things interesting. And the pacing really suffered for it. Um, and I think that was a big challenge. Lost the TV show really suffered from this because on network they had to hit like 22 episode seasons, but they only had like 1 to 2 seasons worth of story, and the network would not let them end the show. And so they had to keep trying to figure out how do we make more story? Well, let's introduce the back half of the plane, right? Like and new characters there. And it usually becomes like new character introductions tend to kind of allow you an easy out to feed in story extension,
Hmm.
so that you can keep the concept going. But long answer to a short question, right? I like the proper format for the length of story that you have, and whether or not that takes on, an hour to a 2 hour runtime, or a 4 to 8 episode series, or a 22 episode series. That's kind of up to how much story you have and how interesting your characters are and what your twists and turns are that keep me engaged.
Hmm.
I like a good mystery story. My wife and I right now are rewatching the Veronica Mars TV show, which, if you have never watched Veronica Mars, it launched the career of Kristen Bell. Um, and she's like in the first 3 seasons, she's like a high school private investigator.
Uh-huh.
And her best friend was murdered, and her dad was blamed for it. And there's all these different mysteries that are kind of going on. And I thought that that show did a good job, especially in the first season or two, of juggling like the main mystery, which gets solved by the end of the season, and then all the little mysteries that pop up in between, which might last like an episode or two, to kind of keep you engaged and going, so they don't always have to focus on another clue that she has to find about the main mystery.
Hmm.
And so we're watching the fourth season right now, which was on Hulu, which was only 8 episodes. The rest of the show, seasons 1 and 2, I think were full network 22 episode seasons. Season 3 got canceled, so it only lasted like 10 to 13 episodes. And now this new one on Hulu takes more of like a streaming format, short form story. So it's only 8 episodes. And this one's about somebody bombing popular spring break locations at, in the town that she lives in, and she's trying to solve these mysteries, and other little interpersonal mysteries are kind of cropping up throughout. And again, it's doing a good job, I think, of introducing enough to keep you interested, but not overwhelming you with too many mysteries that you've got to take notes in order to watch the TV show.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not a show that you can have on in the background and not pay attention to. Like, you have to pay attention to the show
Hmm.
in order to enjoy it. And so, again, long answer to a short question. I think for me, it's how long does it need to be? Because if it becomes popular, there's this desire to keep it going into infinity. And if you don't have story to do that with, yeah, some fans might keep coming back for it, but it's just gonna be a lot of filler. And sometimes that can be enjoyable, but sometimes that can be frustrating.
That show kind of sounds like it could be recycled though, because like, there's a mystery, she solves it, and she goes on to the next mystery, right?
Well, and sometimes the mysteries compound, right? So the murderer gets killed, and oh, why did the murderer get killed, and who did that, and is there a larger conspiracy at play? Um it it's it, it was a really well done show that I think just did not connect with people on the CW, which were more interested in like, Roswell or Smallville, where you have very attractive people often taking off their shirts and dealing with like an
Ah,
episodic conundrum for them to do. That's not what this show was. This was an ongoing, serialized drama about a teenage PI who narrates the show like a hard-boiled crime noir story. And she has attitude and she has agency and she has um, very strong qualities that a lot of characters at on TV shows on that network at the time just did not have, which again appeals to me because I like strong female characters in my stories. I mean, I grew up with, Sigourney Weaver and Linda Hamilton and like the
Yeah.
first female action heroes uh, at the time. And so that becomes like a model for me when it comes to storytelling. And I like Veronica's take on it. And I like Kristen Bell taking no shit from anybody. Like as she's going through these adventures. I mean, there's a part I won't spoil it, or well, it's not a spoiler because it's in one of the trailers for the thing. But like she's out jogging at 5 in the morning and she gets mugged, and she uses her taser on the mugger, and then she robs him. like like that's
What?
just who her character is,
Uh-huh.
and it's so fun to see Kristen Bell play that character because she does it so well, like just so naturally. And when you have an actor or an actress that's just so perfect for that role, like it's a joy to see them in it. And that's again to your point, right? Like you want to focus on that character and you want to see them in it more. And if you have to focus on your supporting cast a little bit more, some of that can be important to the main character's journey or the plot journey, but sometimes it just becomes filler. And filler, filler can be fun, but filler can also get frustrating.
This is how I see like a story. It's like this is the main story, right? And yeah, I can like go on a bit of like side plot, but ev eventually you have to go back to the main story. And then, but a lot of shows, I think there was a show named Gintama. Have you ever watched it before? They're like
Not familiar with that one.
it's like a show about parodies of other shows, basically. Like the entire show is about parodies, and there's parodies specifically about Japanese anime. And they're talking
Okay.
about how some often shows like the anime would catch up to the manga, so they had to make fillers, and then they eventually have to go back to the main story. But a lot of times, the main story would catch up with the manga, and then they would go to a subplot, and they will never come back to the main plot.
Well, that's
Yeah.
what happened with Full Metal Alchemist, where Full Metal Alchemist, the animated series caught up to the manga.
Mhm.
They kind of took it in a direction, and they finished off the anime, and then the manga went in a completely different direction, so they had to start a new anime, which was Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, which follows the manga more than the anime. And it's interesting because the point of deviation that they have in there,
Mhm.
because you can see the similarities for like the first 5 to 10 episodes, right? Very, very similar.
That's it?
Um, and then, because I mean, the anime was 50, 56 episodes, something like that, right? And
Okay.
they're working several months ahead of where the manga is, if not a year ahead for
Yeah.
animation. I don't know the specifics, so I'm playing a guessing game here, um, but the direction that they took it in, like I didn't entirely mind
Mhm.
because it was a neat idea. It was a twist on an idea that they had introduced very early on, and it felt like an organic part of the story. So I enjoy both the OAV and Brotherhood for Full Metal Alchemist because you do eventually get like that very different kind of end point and how they get there and the journey that the characters go on is different. And it's an opportunity to keep coming back to those characters that you enjoy. They're just in kind of a different adventure. And I'm sure some anime purists will disagree with me. And obviously people have preferences about which one they like more. And I'm sure I do too if I watched them again more recently. But in my head, it's been 15 odd some years since I've watched them. But in my head, like I remember that there are parts of each that I enjoy, and there are parts of each that I don't. And so it's I in my head I get to kind of cherry pick and nostalgically go back to, oh, I do remember when they did that in the original, and that was a fun idea. That was kind of neat. Versus like within Brotherhood, where it's like, oh yeah, they did do this thing with the characters that they didn't do in the other one, and that was really fun, and that was really kind of neat. And I tend to try to focus on the things that I like about a story than the things that I don't, because life's too negative already, right? Like, let's just focus on the
Yeah.
things we love.
What was that idea that you found was interesting that like? they delved into that wasn't part of the manga.
Well, I don't want to spoil it, and I might be misremembering it because it's been a while since we had
Mhm.
in there. But it was in the opening narrations of the show, in the opening credits of the show, they always talked about the idea of equivalent exchange, right? Because they're alchemists, so they can't take a pencil and turn it into a car. Like that's just not possible. They only have a pencil, so they can only use the components that are within that pencil in order to turn it into something else.
Mhm.
Um, and in that original series, it gets to a point at one point where they say the law of equivalent exchange is a lie. It's not real. It's untrue. And that's where I was like, that's kind of a neat idea. Like you have been telling me at the beginning of every single episode of this show that the law of equivalent exchange exists, that
Mhm.
this is fact. And then you later tell me that no, it's not. And you've introduced a new concept that kind of changes the perspective and the perception of how their abilities work. And that was kind of neat. That was kind of cool. Um, yeah, you'll have to watch it. It streams all the time on places and networks, but
Now
I
it goes
remember that
crazy.
that was an I remember that that was a neat idea where it's you've told me a thing for so long that I just assume it to be true to the point where I'm probably skipping the credits when I'm watching the show. And then
Mhm.
you were just like, oh, that thing we've been telling you for like 20 on some episodes? Just kidding.
We lied to you. Actually, pencils can turn into buildings. I'm kidding. Yeah.
Well, it's the unreliable narrator done in a unique way, right?
Mhm.
And there are so many examples of the unreliable narrator done poorly. And then the ones that we all know are the times where it's done really, really well. And
Mhm.
that tends to be in some kind of thriller or mystery. Sometimes it happens where you subvert structure and you play with structure. Like the movie Memento is very much an unreliable narrator,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
it's because it's structured a story in reverse where you start at the end. It's only until you end up getting to the beginning that you understand why this has been done. And so these are unique little tricks and twists and ways that you can kind of subvert that. And Full Metal Alchemist, I feel like kind of did that a little bit through repetition. Whereas
Mhm.
we keep telling you that, I'll make it up, this is red, and red is red, and red is the law of the land. And now we're telling you that red is not red. Red is not the law of the land. Red is not true.
Mhm.
And that becomes interesting, right? Like that's an interesting, unreliable narrator through repetition.
You know, I love Memento. I think it's like one of my favorite movies because I feel like it's so unique. I don't know any other movies where you can watch it from the start and you can also watch it from the end.
Mm-hmm.
Like backwards. You can reverse it. I think if you buy the DVD, you can watch it like two ways. So that you can watch from the proper way, which is technically backwards, or you
Mm-hmm.
can watch it the other way, which is, from the end. But I think the original like meant to watch way is better because it's more
Yeah.
like you get shocked throughout the whole thing. And then if you watch it like the backwards way, it feels like a spoiler to me. So I don't like it as
Well,
much.
the goal of storytelling, and especially storytelling at the time, is to keep the viewer guessing
Yeah.
as to what's going on and give them just enough information to either keep them interested or to help them like put the pieces together. So like
Mhm.
I was watching Pirates of the Caribbean, the first movie, with my kids fairly recently, and I'd forgotten just how well structured that movie was. Where you've got it opens up with Liz on the pirate ship, and then she sees like a boy in the water, and you're like, who is this boy? What is this boy doing? Right? And then they see like the burning ship, and it visually keeps kind of pulling you in, and then we get introduced to Jack, and Jack is on a ship that is sinking
Yeah.
right as he's coming into port, and you can tell he's a pirate because he dresses like a pirate and he acts like a pirate. But what like you as an audience are like, who is this character? Like, why is he here? How did he get on this ship that is sinking? You know, and so you keep the audience guessing, you keep the audience wanting more. And the most obvious moment of this is when he finally squares off in the first sword duel um, with why am I blanking on the actor's name? Frickin' Legolas from Lord of the Rings, Orlando Bloom.
Yeah.
They have their first duel with Orlando Bloom, and Jack Sparrow pulls out his pistol
Yeah.
and he aims it and he's telling him to move. He's like, no, and he's like, this shot is not meant for you. And then he gets clubbed over the head and knocked out. And you as an audience is like, well, who is that shot meant for? And so
Exactly.
again, like you keep coming back to like these questions which keep you engaged. And to me, that's like a lean forward form of storytelling where you're always interested in what's happening because there's a mystery to kind of
Hmm.
solve. And it doesn't have to be a literal mystery of like somebody took my pen, who done it. It can be character focused where it's they've given you a nugget of information about themselves or about their arc or their journey or what they're trying to accomplish, their motivation, and it's just enough that you are intrigued but not so much that you know what's happening yet. And it's
Hmm.
only until the end of the story where all those pieces finally come together. And so that type of storytelling structure, I think, was very satisfying, specifically to me, because that was the era when I grew up and I was watching those more sophisticated kind of storytelling movies. And it's something that I think is lacking in a lot of storytelling today, where there's not as much intrigue, there's not as much interest because things are franchised or serialized. Because we've seen, I'll make it up, Captain America in 4 or 5 movies now, and we kind of know who Steve Rogers is, and we kind of know what Steve Rogers' deal is, and there's not a lot of mystery about him. So, what can you make a mystery about, and how do you kind of keep that character interesting, or how do you retire that character and use some of the other characters to keep it interesting and engaging and kind of that lean forward storytelling? And I feel like that's a struggle that's going on right now because of the serialization of film franchises, where you know, unless you have that character go rogue and they show up in like a shroud and they're like, oh, doing some shady stuff, but I'm still me. Like, and then you'll get movies that subvert expectations, like Deadpool and Wolverine, where they have, the moment where Chris Evans comes into the movie and Deadpool thinks it's Cap and you think it's Cap,
It's
and
no, it's
everyone's
wild.
like, yeah, and everyone's like, yeah, it's Captain America. All right, we're gonna see Captain America in a Deadpool R-rated movie. Let's see what this
Uh-huh.
is. And no, it's not Cap. Chris Evans has played other Marvel characters before, and that was funny, and that
Mhm.
subverts expectations. And again, that keeps you guessing as to what's going to happen next. And I like that. I really like that in storytelling.
Also, it's like a bad thing because lately everything that comes out is a remake, so you already know exactly what you're gonna see by going into it, you know?
Sometimes, yeah. Again, if they can subvert expectations, if they can do something that keeps you guessing, um, then it can be interesting and intriguing. Final Fantasy VII's getting the had the rebirth, sorry, remake and rebirth, and now they've got a third and final one that's kind of coming out. And
Mm.
I played the original game back in the day when it was there. And part of it is I haven't played it in ages, so it's nice to kind of revisit these characters in this world. But the other part is like they're focusing on smaller chunks of the story, and so they can expand those out and explore them more, and that can create them or more interest and intrigue around them as well, where we
Mhm.
don't have to focus on that C story so much as we can focus on that A story or create new A stories within there that keep it fresh and interesting and unique.
Hmm. I have a question. Do you feel that you write your stories for yourself or for your audience?
I usually write them for me first. Yeah.
Hmm.
I can't remember who told me this back in the day, but they said, so long as you write a story that you would want to read, then you're going to care about it. You're going to be engaged with it. You're going to be passionate about it. And the audience who will also be passionate about it will find you. And so if I don't write a story that I love, if I'm not writing a story that I care about, it's too easy for me to get distracted and to prioritize other things that are
Yeah,
out there. One of the things that I say a lot in panels and workshops, I do conventions and stuff all around the country.
that's where I found you.
Um, yeah, yeah. And thank you for finding me, by the way. But one of the things that I'll often say is, as a creative person, like ideas are never a challenge for me. Like I have a million and one ideas a second. I only have enough time to write like 2 or 3 of those stories. And
Hmm.
so when I sit down to write a story with the economic cost of, or the opportunity cost of everything else that I could be doing or writing or anything else that's out there, right? it can't just be a story that I like. It has to be a story that I love
Yeah.
because I don't have time to write a story that I like. I have too many other things to do.
Mhm.
And so for me, I always write for me first. And, does this subvert my expectations? Is this a unique voice or spin to what I think this character should be, or this story should be, or this genre should be? And that keeps me coming back and keeps me engaged and interested. And then again, hopefully the audience kind of finds this story. Um, and hopefully they keep coming back for more, which is why I try to offer a variety of things when you come to my table at a convention, right? Like, because hopefully if I've never written something before, but you like my take on a horror story. Maybe you'll like my take on a kid's sci-fi story, or maybe you'll like my take on a cyberpunk story or a supernatural workplace comedy like Repossessed, and anything else that I have coming out.
I agree
That's
with
the
you.
hope.
100%. That I agree with you so much. And I'm impressed that you can write in all genres still. Like I can't believe you do that. I can't. Well, I can try maybe in the future, but for now, everything I wrote like 5 stories and they're all sci-fi for some
That's
reason.
There's nothing wrong with that. No, no, no. And I don't want to make it sound like you need to have that versatility. There's value in expertise
Mm,
and and focus within a particular genre or with a particular set of characters that you know very, very well. Um, you look at somebody like um, Stephen King, right, who
yeah.
writes a lot of horror, but he's also written a lot of drama, and he's also written books about writing, and he's kind of all over the place. Versus like a Michael Crichton, who used to write with um, a lot of science related kind of stories, but then he's also written Eaters of the Dead, and he's written a pirate heist story from back in the day. And every now and then you'll get these nuggets of them like trying something new and different, which is kind of interesting. But they do have like you have an expectation when you pick up one of their books of what you're going to read, and
Yeah.
more often than not, it's exactly what you're expecting on there, which is great. And it's only over time that I feel like those writers started to kind of branch out. My wife reads Nora Roberts, who's known as a romance novelist, but now she's writing like crime thrillers and mysteries and like fantasy adventure stories. But she wasn't doing that 20 years ago, at least not that I'm aware of, right?
Mm,
Like, so there's nothing wrong with focus and honing your craft in a space that you are comfortable with. And then when and if you ever feel comfortable enough to branch out, then by all means feel free, but don't feel the pressure to do that. Because at the end of the day, like if you don't care about what you're doing and you're not doing it for yourself, then you're never going to finish it. And you
mm.
always got to finish it. Like, because you said you've written 5 stories. Have you finished all 5 of those stories?
Finished 2 and
Okay.
like 3. So, and
See?
I think two, and then one here. So, and then I'm trying to like pitch some of them, the last 3. So that's also part of the reason why I didn't completely finish. I wrote like an outline only, and I'm trying to pitch it,
Okay.
but we'll see how it goes. I have not gone through the whole process yet. So,
Sure.
um,
Well, and so again, like in my mind, it's about being able to finish that story because so many people out there that want to be storytellers, like they're very good at having an idea. That idea might be a story. Um, they might start that idea, but I keep encountering, and sometimes they'll finish like a part of that story, and sometimes they'll go back and they'll redo it, and I'm like, you can't sell book one again. Like, so why are you rewriting book one? Like,
hmm.
go write book two, go write book three. As storytellers, we get better as we go on. I am a huge advocate of the idea of learn by doing. And if you do something more and more and more, you get better at doing it, whatever
Exact.
that thing may be. Um, you know, be it writing, be it storytelling, be it structure and craft, be it art, be it construction, be it mechanics, I don't care what it is, right? Like you get better at doing the things by doing the things. And so if you go back and you look at something that you wrote like a year ago and you still think that it's good, you might not have grown enough. And that doesn't mean that it was bad.
Yeah.
That just means that you've gotten better and you've gone back and you've looked at what this thing was that you did, and you can recognize the flaws that it has, and you can do a better job now. And and I'm not saying there aren't reasons to go back and potentially rewrite things, but like if you look at Lore Olympus on Webtoons, right? Like
Yeah.
episode one and the final episode that she did are very different in terms of the structure, the pacing, the art, the dialogue, all those things. And it's not that episode one was bad, it's that she worked on this series for many years and
Mhm.
she got better at crafting her style in storytelling, in art, in all of those elements that build that visual storytelling together.
Mhm.
And that's evolution. And that's not a thing to be ashamed of. And that's not a thing to shy away from. And that's not a thing to um, necessarily go back and say, I want to redo it as like my definitive edition or blah, blah, blah. Because guess what? It's going to happen again. Like you're going to redo that first book and you're going to be like, you know what? Now I'm better at it again and I would do it again. And you're never going to finish that story because you
Mhm.
just keep going back and redoing it. And I always like to encourage people to finish that story and then you can move on to the next story. And then after you've done a couple of different stories and you've finished those, if you really want to go back and redo that first one, cool, go for it. Like I've had a handful of projects where I've wanted to do that as well.
Mhm.
You know, things that I wrote in high school or middle school where it's like, I really like the idea of this thing. Like the execution of the thing was poor because I know a
Yeah.
lot more now than I did then, but the idea of the thing is great and I could modernize that and I could do something with that today, but I haven't had time.
I think it's better to just get it done than just like you get more results by actually doing the thing than just being like, oh, it has to be perfect, you know. I wanna get it completely right, and then a lot of people just never finish it because they're like perfectionists.
Well, you've got two different types of creators, right? So there are fine arts kind of people who have the luxury of perfection being a part of their vocabulary. And then there's commercial arts kind of people. And commercial art is art on a deadline. That means it has to be done by a certain time and it has to be done to a certain degree of quality and it has to be available or else you have missed your deadline and now you're fired. Right. And
Yeah.
so those people don't have the luxury of perfect.
Hmm.
Those people have learned to embrace good enough.
Hmm.
And I think good enough is a very important concept for aspiring creators to figure out where that threshold is between not good enough and good enough to keep it going.
Hmm.
Because, if the best artists in the world that you revere and that you look at had 1,000 hours to do a picture, or they had 1 hour to do a picture, which one do you think is going to get done first? And are you still going to like it? And are you going to like the 1,000 hour one more than you like the one that took them 1 hour?
Hmm.
And at the end of the day, does it matter? Right? Like, because you're also trying to make a profit in commercial art.
Yeah. No,
Fine
nobody
art,
cares. Yeah. Like,
yeah, fine art, that thing can hang up in your wall or your parents' wall or whatever, and you will revere it and love it, and it will be awesome and amazing. But you're not making 50 episodes of a thing every week per week, on Webtoon to get a story out there into a world in front of an audience. That's it, different goals, different expectations, different definitions of success.
hmm. Well, Trevor, where can our awesome, cool people watching this right now, where can they find your work?
Yeah, Trevor A. Mueller is me on every single social media page: Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, TikTok. I'm still on Twitter. Find me, follow me, friend me. TrevorAMueller.com is my website. There is a newsletter that you can join if you'd like to. But yeah, I'm always online and I'm always around, and I don't post as much as I used to because I'm working on deadlines. But I'm usually doing something.
You can like,
So
click on the description because I probably put it in there if I didn't forget. Pretty sure I didn't because I'm a memorable person. I like to think, responsible person, hopefully. So, well, thank you so much, Trevor. That's a wrap for today's episode of Podcast for Fun. Thank you for joining us and sharing your incredible insight. That was so interesting. I was like mesmerized like 90% of the time, to be honest.
Well, I'm happy that it got that high. So Sophia, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to speak to you and your readers or your listeners. And again, anytime you want to chat, I'm around.
I'd love to. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, smash that subscribe button, and share it with any fellow storytelling enthusiasts. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to explore, you can drop them in the comments or connect with me on any of my social medias at Podcast for Fun. Until next time, keep creating, keep dreaming, and we'll see you on the next episode of Podcast for Fun.